So welcome here in this very new place. And so my name is Angela Koczi, and I'm a research fellow, not in this institute, actually, in the Institute of Sociology, which is close to this place. And I'm also a faculty member at the Summer University, and most of you are from there. And actually, where we are right now, it's a workshop which is organized by the Roma critical. How do you translate?
Roma Critical Theory Research Group.
Roma Critical Theory Research Group, which has been established approximately 1 year ago. And maybe just a little bit about the history, about the whole idea. As you can imagine, in Hungary, as many other European, particularly Central Eastern European countries, Roma are very much missing from the academia. And very recently, so few of us had an opportunity to be involved as a research fellow in various institutions, and we thought that this would be a time to set up this very critical research theory group, or I don't know how March is translating for that, and try to approach the whole issue from a different angle, from a different viewpoint, which has been used by various researchers, scholars in Hungary particularly. And actually this is the 6th workshop, and I really hope that we will have more colleagues from the Institute, but that's usual, as you see. It's a great interest, and hopefully they will come as well, because I think that would be really interesting for you as well to interact with them and to know about their research field. And also we thought that this workshop is going to be devoted for the Roma body politics, the manifestations of Roma body politics. And actually we will have a panel with Daniel Baker, Dr. Daniel Baker, Dr. Ethel Brooks, and Delan Lebas, and Jane is not here, or I thought that Jane will join to us as well.
Jane is in... She's here. She's at the back.
Oh, but I think... Okay, great. But anyway, it would be great if you would participate in our discussions and myself. And why we thought actually that this whole Roma body politics is important, because it's very much a missing field. I mean, if you look at what kind of researches, studies has been done, not just in Hungary but in Europe on Roma, you can hardly find research on performing Romani identities. You can hardly find something on body politics, which is not like a hardcore sociological or ethnographical studies, right? So particularly in Central Eastern European countries, there is a history approaching Romani issues as ethnographical, folkloristic issues, right? Or where I'm coming from the sociological school, which is very much this kind of positivistic sociological school, right? Using all kinds of statistical data, analyzing it, and be objective, and never question it, the objectivity as such, and so on. And many of us who are sitting here, as well as we who funded this critical workshop, first of all, we don't believe in objectivity. So, but I guess it's not a new thing for you, but because feminists and feminist theories already challenge the objectivity as a fact. And also, we believe that there is something else which are missing from this kind of discourse. And one of the issues, actually, which is missing, exactly this body politics. So what does it mean? And how does it manifest? And body politics, as we can understand, and we indicated in our blurb as well, that it could regulate, control, and racialize the body of Roma, right? So it's very important that when you see a body, you can read that body, and it's like as a discursive text what you can read. And bodies, as we indicated as well, is not just matter, but also a core of the political order. It's a markers of genders, ethnicity, race, social status, power, and even citizenship as well. And here I just would like to make a little clarification, because I think in our institution, if I may say that, like ethnicity, that's what we are using, and we are not really using race. But we, as a critical workshop, we really much think that the ethnicity has been racialized in Europe. When we are talking about Roma in a European context, we are talking about the racialized minorities, which is different than the ethnic minorities, right? So you can't compare with the Italian minorities or the Slovak minorities in Hungary. And as we know that the bodies are really a powerful symbols and sources of social and political power, and as I already referred to that, it's really a territory of social and political exclusion as well. So we try to theorize that what does it really mean, this kind of black body politics in European countries, and how does it relate to Roma, and why bodies matter and why races matter. So the body usually it's considered to be a very personal issues, right? So it's very much in your private sphere. It's something which is very natural, biological, or a kind of unproblematic category, or apolitical. That's how it is approached in a mainstream social science, right? So that's why you can hardly find in European mainstream social science something about body politics and racialization of Roma. Particularly if I'm thinking about the classical scholarship on Roma, which has been produced in the last 30, 40, 50 years, right? And always there's this kind of nature-culture dichotomy, and just like similarly when we are thinking about women as well, so the women's body, which considered to be very intimate and very natural and close to the nature, and many times, as we know that people are equating women to their bodies and painting them as less rational or autonomous, right? So they are this hysterical women and full of emotions, and they are irrational completely. Yes, fantastic, but we are not. We are the rational man, and we are the very autonomous bodies. And basically, that's not just in the case of women, but in the case of racialized bodies as well. When we are talking about Roma as a racialized bodies, then you have to think about it, that people are associated with irrationality, wideness, right? So these kinds of natural instinctive bodies, or something which cannot be rational, or you can't compare with the white normalized bodies. So that's how I would like to use it, because white bodies, it's really become normalized in this political context, and which serves to justify their subordinations, right? So and serves to justify their political and social exclusion from the public and political spaces. And so when we are talking about bodies, we have to talk about race as well. So it's again, as I already referred to it, that Roma has been racialized, and Roma bodies, it's racialized, and I hope that we will talk about that. How does it manifest in a reality? And actually, race as such is very much missing from the from the Hungarian academical context. So very recently we started to write about it and discuss it, theorize and problematize it. And really there is a dividing lines or color lines, as many scholars refer to that, in our society, and that basically are being drawn along how we are physically different from one another, and the way, the hair texture. It was a really funny thing. So right now I'm living in North Carolina in US, and I just went to renew my driving license a few days ago before I left, and I went there and the police came to me. Oh, you are from El Salvador. And I thought, no, senor, I'm not. I'm from Hungary. Oh, can you show me your D22, you know, this kind of visa paper? And I showed to him, oh, you are an international student. And I thought, no, I'm a professor. So it's again like reading my bodies, right? So certainly I didn't look someone like who is a white American or white European for sure. So I will put it in the category as a Latin American, right? Because there was something strange on me. So I think that's how it is going on. So it's immediately from the first gaze, you are actually put it in a certain categories. And I just would like to refer to Du Bois, an American black sociologist, and who called the differences of color, hair, and bone, what everyone understands as visible racial differences. And that's why it's important, I think, in the European context, to talking about Roma as a racialized bodies, because they have a very visible differences, right? So it's recognizable. You can distinguish them from the normalized white bodies. Or Stuart Hall was a black British sociologist, theorize, and we learned a lot from here. He concerned with the physiological, cultural, and physical violence that racism inflicts. He wants to understand how racism is cultivated in our imaginations, of how it works and what is the logic behind that. And I'm telling this or referring to Stuart Hall because I think it's very important to understand that the psychological and cultural and physical violence, right, what we are facing, and particularly the psychological and cultural violence, as like post-colonial scholars, Spivak referred to that as an epistemic violence, and many Roma are facing on a daily basis, right? Without even identifying, without naming, without recognizing that kind of harms. It's a harm on our soul and spirit and on our bodies as well. And I really believe that the body is coding as well these kinds of violence. And so racism, I don't want to go into that, like history of the racism, and as a philosophy is that there is a natural connection between the way people look, as I already referred to that, differences, color, hair, and what they think and do, and bodies, which signifies that who we are, right? So little fatty, and definitely not a good athlete. But I'm a good dancer and a good singer. And or bodies which shows that civilized or white, right? So these are very much characteristics which can differentiate us from someone else. And actually, Stuart Hall argues that we have to pay attention not the objective facts of the situation alone. So I'm referring back again the scholarship which has been produced on Roma, or the discourses which has been produced on Roma in Europe. It's mainly was very much engaged with the objective facts, right? The objective situation, and how can we measure, what is the situation. But we have to deal with the stories, the cultures which spin us, what the physical difference is. We are born with, what does it mean? This involves examining the discursive position. And the body as such is really a discursive context. And we can read it as a text, right? So it's a sign of code. It's a contested territory of a symbolic representations as who we are, what we are representing. Why am I from El Salvador, right? But I'm Roma in Hungary, and the politics of the body. It's a subject of knowledge production as well. So it's not just a sign of code, but it's really a subject of knowledge production, and I think that's a very, very important issue, because in these days it's very much contested, right? In the so-called Romani studies, or that who has the rights, and who are these people. And actually Judith Butler, who's a feminist scholar, she suggests that the hierarchy of bodies shaped by our process of knowledge production. In fact, she's referring that there are some kind of hierarchical order between various bodies, right? The bodies which looks really authoritative, looks like as a professor, but someone with that, it doesn't look like as a professor, or who was seen as someone who is coming from El Salvador, the police even would not think about it, that someone who is coming from Latin America can be a professor as well, right? So that's really, there is an implication there. And just a little bit about the Roma body politics in the Gallery 8. So with Junka Ustima, our friend who is a curator and art historian, and right now actually she's in Turkey. And the first time when we started to think about this whole exhibitions, we just started to visualize it, that like how do we perceived by someone who is not Roma, and how do we perceive? Am I perceived as a Romani woman who is a great dancer, singer, or am I perceived as a professor? But I am,
yes.
Absolutely. And how do we perceive our colleagues from another NGOs who is a man? Does he look as a voida in the eyes of someone else, or does he look like as a person who has a very important expertise and knowledge in a very specific field? And certainly we came to the point that we have to theorize race and how race is enacted at the moment of gaze, right? Because it's really clearly an enactment, and it's a kind of spectatorial surveillance, which very much complicates our social relations, right? Because the way as I look at you, so it's implicate many things, and it will impact your behavior, and it will impact your body language, your performance, and this is very much embedded in our European imagination, as we quote with Nidhi Trehan in one of our articles. So there is this European imaginations which imagine Roma as a dancer, as a fortune teller, as a criminals, right? As a dirty people, as a cheater who definitely is going to cheat on me, and we wanted to actually frozen that moment at the exhibition, and of course the gaze it can be very impartial, it can be very non-obligatory or innocent in theory, but immediately when it is interact with race, so it's changing the whole scene. And now I'm just going to show you a few pictures. So many of you know Katalin Bárson. So in the first one, like the stereotypical gypsy girl with the flower, beautiful, right? And with a very specific style of clothes. And the second one, it's a professional woman, right? So you just feel that it's, right? It's invoke a different kinds of feelings and anxiety. Or the next one, our Vajda guy, Julius Rostas, who is one of your professors as well, right? So he's a Romanian king, gypsy king. And here he's a very serious guy, right? The way as he put his hand together and the way as he looks into the camera, it's just a totally different thing, right? And look at Tima. In the first one, she's someone who is coming from the 8th district, right? So it's a rapper, this very interesting T-shirt. And the second one is like a very serious professional woman. And the other guy is who is theater director, and you see him with all these stereotypical icons and the necklace and the cross in his neck and the shirt, what he's wearing. And look at the second picture. So you see, right? And the last one, actually, Agnes Daróci, whom probably many of you know her or read something from her or you heard her for sure. So you see that she's this very old Romani lady and who's a kind of shrewder, that's the word, like someone who is really shrewder.
Calculating.
Yeah, calculating. And the second one is she's a professional woman. So I think I would finish here, and I just would like to give you the floor and feel free to interact and have your short presentations and start to have a dialogue. Thanks. Who would like to start?
Do you want me to go? Okay,
Right.
yeah, that's fine.
Bless you.
That's fine, I'll go first. Okay, can I get my
Oh yeah.
Is it possible to get the presentation up?
Do we know what the internet code is? Because I was gonna. It gave me a thought to show a picture.
Okay. It's just in this one. Yeah, it's that one. Yeah.
Do you
I'll just I'll do it. It's fine.
This is the internet code.
Or do you do the slides? Where's the?
I think the this one.
This one?
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. 213.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's come on right now, don't I? Okay, I'm going to show a series of slides that are part of. I was asked to do a presentation at the Stuart Hall Library in London earlier this year, and it was quite important to me because it was the first anniversary of his death. So I decided to come up with this idea, which is Say No to Identity Theft, which if anyone went to Gallery 8, that was the title of Roma Body Politics 3. That was my exhibition there. So I'm just going to read quickly this bit of text that was actually part of the exhibition. If you haven't been there, I'll just explain it to you. Say No to Identity Theft is an ongoing artistic investigation and intervention into what it means to be a female artist who is Roma in the 21st century. The lyrics from Identity have been an ongoing thing for my life since I first heard them in 1978. This was by a group called X-Ray Specs. As a 13-year-old, being sung by Polystyrene, a truly individual artist who influenced me in the idea of how you could purely be yourself in what you looked like and sounded like, there was no need to conform. I could be who I was and what I was at the same time, looking at how I wanted to be. This has constantly fired my artistic ventures ever since and continues to do so. As Roma, we are stolen artefacts, physically, mentally, artistically. Even now in 2005, we are still seen and contextualised by everyone else but ourselves. We are perceived by others. How we are perceived by others is still valued more important than how we see ourselves in the worldview. We have been and continue to be stereotyped out of our own existence. Our mere presence as human beings is a contested sight. A colonialist way of seeing dominates the language that surrounds us and many others still, and continues to try and suppress us. Artistically, across practice, I continue to question this. My body as artefact, the object, the artistic site, a living sculpture, the work takes place within the gallery setting and on the street. The multiplicity of my identity and my questioning of this is an ongoing everyday artistic unravelling of what it means to always be seen by outside positions. Orientalism and its legacy still infiltrates ways of seeing, and in order to be seen, a different space needs to be created that refuses to speak in the language that has continued and allowed our bodies to be objectified, highly sexualised and stereotyped. I say no to identity theft. I say no to who you think I am. I say no to what you think I should look like. The gaze that is put upon us is disrupted. The passing of being white is played upon, and the true historical legacy that continues to dominate our identity is exposed for the antiquated and exclusion-based structure that it is. To question these structures that are based in old-fashioned ways of thinking and seeing is to question ideas of culture itself and who owns this in terms of visual representation, historical and academic documentation. So I'm just going to go through these slides really quickly. So it's like a bit of a wrap, so you'll just have to bear with me. And I've got this as text. If anyone wants it, I can email it to anyone and things like that. I always was an awkward chavvy, a proper brazen chavvy. I couldn't help it. I still am. Never wanting to or feeling the necessity to conform in any way. Never being able to escape who I was or where I came from, part of and ingrained within that landscape. So who am I? The black Zigan of the poem, who no matter how much I wash my skin will always be what I am. I can never be clean or white no matter what colour I appear to be. Tracing historical paths and hidden histories across the country, making links, finding the same contested spaces. Painting my face to match my spirit, using the brush as a weapon to disrupt and unhinge what is thought to be known. And Ben Cobb sees me and Damien as a Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. Who do you see us as? Standing in a landscape and space that once belonged to everyone and is now being eroded. We were the first to be removed from here. Real Romani, who will tell me I am not? How many times will they tell me this? But I lay it out naked to the truth. I'll tell you what you don't want to hear. Am I Carmen? Maybe yes, maybe no. Who else is as well? We hide and run as living sculptures at Chanctonbury Ring. They say witches gather here, and if you run 7 times anti-clockwise around the clump of trees, you can summon the devil. I listen to the clash while my grandmother and my mum battle it out for my affection and my loyalty, but both wonder why I am the way that I am. To let the horrors of the past be recognised, what has happened, what has been ignored, to be seen, to be exposed. You were trying to do magic, the young boy said to me. The mirror that distracts the evil eye. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And Tim Walker makes us the romantic gypsy couple in a rose garden in Colchester, while David Bradshaw captures me painting over other people's work for Love and Bullets at Transition. It was not a community project. Don't tell me who I am. I'm sure not a Disney princess. Think of this next time you see a clip from My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding. Authenticity? You want that? Well, I can provide that in bucketfuls too if needed. Running away from this is to me. Who do you think I am? with family in Findon, in amongst the trailers with the horse, with family in Findon, lost in my own thoughts at Findon, where the dark energy of minister and ghost and the prophecy of it all comes to fruition. So am I the fortune teller? Will you cross my palm with silver to hear what I have to say? Glasgow Gypsy has landed, Govan Hill Roma. We want a revolution, anarchy is the way. Don't tell us who we are. Gypsy revolution. Yes, we will reclaim the words we want. Yes, we will be what we want to be. Gypsy revolution. Don't tell us who we are. Art and politics together. Gypsy, outsider, punk. Yes, individually. Yes, collectively. I am one and all three and more. History can repeat itself. It is our job to make sure that it does not. I can dress in my capes and my skirts of many colours. Fear, it's all about fear. From within, from without. Fear on both sides, cultivated over history, over time. Fear is control. So who is playing who? Who is who? Don't play the tokenism game. Don't become part of the divide and conquer. Don't become part of the colonialist ideas. They say little girls should be seen but not heard, but as polystyrene said, oh bondage, up yours. And I go back to Findon, but I'm always me. Dressing up for myself, wearing garments that morph and are from other places, often from the marginalised. And I go back to Findon, and this is the reality. But I'm always me. In the Buccaneer. And it takes me back to a different place, a vessel for my memories, for my history, for my work. And I'm dressed like a mythical goddess a la Kenneth Anger in Zandra Rhodes, thanks to Becky Seeger, for a music video that Ben Cobb made. Then I'm tracing Corlinda Lee, the mother of the Gypsy Ball at the Necropolis in Glasgow, capturing it in my crystal ball. Hanging out with mates, planning art happening, eating egg and chips, drinking tea at the new Piccadilly, sadly no longer here. A round peg in a square hole. Don't try and force me, I won't fit. Mother, student, artist, all three, each one and more. International identities? The past. Who owns our history? Who has written our history? The present is where we are now, and who owns this? To quote Stuart Hall, roots of the present in the past, and another history is always possible. The future, who will write this? Who will own this? And she roars and stirs, never a time for me to be complacent. As soon as I even remotely get comfortable, she is roaring in my ear. And I read my books about Tibet, and I meditate. I'm tired of being told constantly who I should be, what I should call myself. This is my identity, it's mine to claim. I say no to identity theft. It's time for us all to reclaim truly who we are, and maybe the multiplicity of this. Remembering the first time I heard polystyrene, with those words echoing in my head, remembering the clothes, dress for yourself. To not be afraid, to not look right. So who am I? Tara helps me document this constantly, ongoing since 2005. So who am I? Quoting Audre Lorde at a feminist conference in Dubrovnik with my sisters Ethel and Anissa. Never being frightened to be the tiger, to wear my colours boldly, defiantly, to be free under the sky, to look and wear what I want. From when I was small, yes, they made their mistake. They let me live, to quote Jack Smith. My life, my work, who I am, what I am. There is no dividing line. Singing with the noise band HRT, being reminded constantly, even when making my art, about gypsies and evictions and what this all means in the world. Having my face as a poster for London Underground. Did anyone know that I was a gypsy? Imagine this next to a poster from my big fat gypsy wedding. Hold that, now that's a new work in progress. Wearing a Union Jack, I was born here and I know who St George really was. He's a patron saint of Roma and he was Palestinian. I think of that when I see so many people waving their flags and wonder, do they know? How white am I? How really white are any of us? And even when we've got permission, have we got permission? Fixed, mobile, nomadic, any, either, or all three. The contested space that is personal, public, educational, institutional, and academic. And so you think you know who we are.
Hello, I'm Daniel Baker. I think I met some of you yesterday. I'm going to read some extracts from a paper that I've just completed for the ERRC journal, so a couple of us may be aware of what's in it. So it's from my research in 2002, my master's research at Greenwich University, which looked at the experience of gay Romanis in the UK. So I placed an advertisement in the gay press in the UK, and I think that my advertisement was gay gypsy would like to meet other gay gypsies, myself being the initial gay gypsy that I mentioned. And so I asked questions during the interviews about what it means to be both gay and Romani at the same time. In 2001 the interviews took place, and during the interview people asked about their early life experience. So there are 4 categories: early life experience, coming out and its repercussions, recognition of others and their strategies for negotiating their gypsy and their gay identities. And this relates to what we're talking about, because the main thrust of this paper is about the concept, the actuality of passing. So i.e. passing as one, passing into a category which you might not necessarily essentially belong to. So I think it's very interesting, the idea of the racialized body, and also the body as a subject of knowledge, and also the body not always signifying necessarily who we are. So I'll just read some extracts from this paper. So the main thrust of modern sociological debate concerning identity has been to challenge earlier essentialist understandings of the concept. These earlier versions assume a unique and fixed core to individual identity, one that is virtually constant throughout life. Contrasting these ideas are the more recent sociological and psychoanalytic theories that explore the concept of identity as something invented and constructed. I'll just read a quote from Judith Butler here. Identifications are never fully or finally made. They are incessantly reconstituted, and as such are subject to volatile logic of iterability. They are that which is constantly marshalled, consolidated, retrenched, contested, and on occasion compelled to give away. Here Butler suggests that identity is not fixed but fluid, open to continual negotiation and influence, that we locate our sense of self in relation to the circumstances around us. One of the concerns of this paper is how we as individuals develop multiple facets of our identity, and how we then combine and manage these elements together. Ideas of identity as fluid, changeable and open to influence are explored in the work of Hall, Gilroy and Foucault, whose emphasis on the multiplicity of identities becomes central to many recent accounts on the subject. Foucault suggests that, as I'm sure you all know, suggests that as individuals we are capable of inhabiting multiple identities, and that as such we offer divergent and contradictory versions of the self, depending on our perceived location within any particular discourse. His work focuses on the development of individuality in all its forms within a web of power relations, as well as indicating that as individuals we are addressed by a range of possible versions of ourselves. He suggests that the multiple identities inhabited by us in relation to various social practices are themselves linked to larger structures of identity, structures such as class, ethnicity, race, gender and sexuality, all of which continually interact with each other throughout our lives. The contingent nature of identity allows fundamental aspects of identity to be concealed or revealed at will. Patterns of concealment, or passing, and revelation, coming out, are well practiced among the 2 groups examined in this paper. So that's the subject of the paper is the queer gypsy. So the 2 groups in question are the gay group and the Roma group. So the construction of our sexual identities and ethnic identities differ in fundamental ways. Sexual identification, or sexuality, describes behaviours and their associations with a set of desires, whereas ethnic identity is determined at birth through parentage and location, one seemingly predetermined and the other acquired. As discussed earlier, all aspects of our identity are open to change and reinvention, but certain elements such as skin colour or birthplace are fixed. Although the construction of ethnic and sexual identities differ fundamentally, there remain parallels within the construction of gay and gypsy identities. Both are informed by oppressive external definition. Both groups possess a heightened facility to manipulate identity owing to the relative absence of distinguishing physical signifiers. So this research took place in the UK, so bodies are possibly different in that situation. So I'll talk a little about passing. So the term passing is used in the context of this research to describe the way in which a person may choose to conceal aspects of their identity in order to pass as a member other than their own group. Again, I'll quote Butler. The question of what can and cannot be spoken and what can and cannot be publicly exposed is raised throughout the text, and it is linked to the larger question of the dangers of public exposure of both colour and desire. Here Butler describes the 1929 novella called Passing by the black author Nella Larson, in which the author deals with the processes and implications of a black woman passing as white, a mechanism that clearly requires sufficient ambiguity of appearance or behaviour to pass. Ian Hancock writes, "I know of very few Romani who weren't warned as children to keep their ethnicity to themselves outside of the community. Both gays and gypsies have historically been well placed to employ strategic passing, with self-protection or ease of passage determining when and where to pass as straight or non-gypsy. Here, ethnicity and sexuality mirror each other within circles of concealment and revelation. Similarly, a similar concurrency that is explored in relation to the gay Jewish community in the book Twice Blessed on being lesbian or gay and Jewish." So this is a quote from the book. "Like Jews who assimilate, we learn to pass as heterosexual, dressing the part, omitting a lover's gender from conversation, or refraining from public displays of affection. Passing not only hurts ourselves, but also the communities in which we live, which don't reap the benefits of our authentic participation." End of quote. So although passing can hurt all involved, its instrumentality cannot be underestimated. This is not to suggest that passing is ever an easy option. Just as the process of passing can offer safety from attack, it also carries with it the constant anxiety of being seen. I'll talk a little bit about diaspora identities. So a quote from Gilroy. "Diaspora introduces the possibility of an historical rift between the location of residence and the location of belonging. Diaspora demands the recognition of interculture." The intercultural terms gypsy and queer are both used to describe globally linked collectivities of identity rather than fixed identity positions. This unfixity relates not only to the range of possibilities within each identity position, but also to the persistence of community and cultural values independent of geographical territory. Both are in essence stateless collectives, one established through a blood network and the other through a network of identification and recognition. Collective identities are generally created through recognition of commonality, shared origin, common goals or characteristics. Without disregarding the importance of this construction of identity, Paul stresses the overriding influence of difference in our construction of identity. He suggests that identities are, and I quote, "more than a product of the marking of difference and exclusion. They are the sign of an identical, naturally constituted unity." In other words, commonalities are important, but identities are also defined and constructed through contrast. These ideas are echoed in the work of Paul Gilroy, in which he examines the construction of diaspora identities in relation to host societies. He suggests that concepts of collective identity are generally promoted and perceived as natural or mythic, concealing the fact that they have at some time been socially constructed. Gilroy uses the concept of diaspora to examine cross-national workings of identity formation, questioning the relevance of identity as fixed and unchanging. Where diaspora challenges the idea of identity as essential and absolute, it also disrupts the fundamental power of territory to determine identity. Again, I'll quote Gilroy. Diaspora stages the dynamic process of identity formation in a specific manner, accentuating the power that people enjoy to create themselves and their distinctive cultures where this cannot be openly acknowledged. Gilroy's work focuses on race and the cultural crossings thereof. Yet the ideas as expressed above have resonance beyond the realm of ethnicity. The workings of cultural identity management in the face of discrimination are pertinent to many groups. In her article Evaluating Diaspora Beyond Ethnicity, Floya Anthias challenges the stark absence of gender concerns in discussions of diaspora identities. Equally absent from the debate are issues relating to sexual orientation and the increased possibility for hybridity that they introduce. Concerns regarding belonging and displacement are not exclusive to racial and ethnic groupings, but are transferable to many collectives. Sexuality often produces forced migration from family and community. Border crossings and settlements need not be purely geographic in order to construct a diasporic identity. The traversal of cultural and emotional territory can produce a similar sensibility. This is evident in the experience of gay gypsies in their parallel negotiations of sexuality, ethnicity and belonging in the light of multiple prejudice. And I'll just finish with a brief concluding part, which refers to the findings from my research. So throughout my analysis, a lack of visibility was a key issue. A double invisibility exists for the subjects of this research. The pervasive invisibility of the gypsy in society and the invisibility of gays in gypsy communities. The management of gypsiness in the light of prejudice and misunderstanding afforded by society in general seems to inform the management of gayness within gypsy communities. It seems that the way in which from a very early age one experiences one's gypsy identity in relation to the non-gypsy world gives a model of processes and adaptations that may be employed to manage one's gay identity in the non-gay community, suggesting a direct relationship between how gays position themselves within the Roma community and how the Romani community positions itself to other groups in society, i.e. not truly seen at all, but signified by an array of archetypes that serve to obscure authentic representation and connection. Mm-hmm. It appears that the learned behaviour of not being seen has become difficult for the gay gypsy to avoid. In fact, a fact reflected in their inability to recognise each other. And that refers to the fact that the people that I interviewed couldn't tell me of any other gay gypsies that they knew, i.e. in their interactions in gay culture, they were not aware of any other gay gypsies or any other gays that were identifying as gypsy. So this was a kind of an inability for them to see themselves in the environment that they found themselves in, either through others not presenting as such, or a lack of expectation to encounter the gypsy in the gay world. So I'll just read that again. It appears that the learnt behaviour of not being seen has been difficult for the gay gypsy to avoid, a fact reflected in their inability to see or recognise each other. As the data suggests, seeing gypsiness in the gay space is as alien to our interviewees as seeing gayness in the gypsy space. The former negating constructive connection and community constructive connection and community building between gay gypsies, and the latter leading to detachment from family and community, in effect dismantling community. All the interviewees experience physical and emotional detachment from their gypsy communities. These migrations of body and mind have both personal and community resonance for those involved. The term diaspora suggests identification with a relational network, characteristically produced by a forced movement through dispersal and reluctant scattering. That's Gilroy's words. Okay. So it seems that out gay gypsies are compelled to compound this narrative of diaspora by continuing to cross geographic, cultural and behavioural boundaries in their pursuit of acceptance. All form men report isolation from other gays. Meeting other gay gypsies in myself seemed to have, so meeting myself as another gay gypsy, seemed to have presented a rare but welcome opportunity to spend time with someone who they could identify with, or as importantly, identify with them. This suggests an appetite for networks of affiliation and recognition, the development of which depends upon how openly sexuality is expressed. Several of the respondents to my advertisement were not willing to be interviewed as they were not out to their families and communities, but they were willing to speak briefly over the phone about their involvement with other gay gypsies. They spoke of networks of gay friends, gay gypsy friends whose sexual identity was kept hidden from their families and communities. These callers revealed an alternative to the detachment from community experienced by the 4 recorded interviewees, albeit at the price of open exchange. Their full reports, along with those of the 4 men interviewed, suggest that in order to maintain full integration into Roma communities, one has to sacrifice the open expression of sexual identity. And conversely, that in order to explore an openly gay identity, one's integration within the gypsy community is compromised to a significant degree. I'll finish with a quote from Gilroy. As Gilroy suggests, in reference to transcultural patterns of hybridity and diaspora, intermixture is something more than the loss and betrayal that we were always told it must be. The loss and betrayal he refers to is echoed in the words of those interviewed during my research. The something more is yet to be realised, but cannot be far off. So this was written in say 2002, and things are changing, as some of you may know. There have been books published on the subject. More recently, a book by Vera Kotic on the Roma lesbian experience in 2014. And in August in Prague, there is I think it's the first Roma gay GLBTIQ conference at the Prague Pride. So things are changing. So this is a relatively historic document, but nevertheless has some interesting implications for what we're discussing here in terms of the body as a site of knowledge production.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm going to use a little bit of the piece that I've been doing for the ERC, but I'm going to also combine it with some other thoughts about embodiment and violence and the subject of the West. So I'm going to begin with a quote by Spivak, and she says, Gayatri Spivak writes, quote, in Canada Subaltern Speak, quote, some of the most radical criticism coming out of the West today is a result of an interested desire to conserve the subject of the West, or the West as subject. Although the history of Europe as subject is narrativized by law, political economy, and ideology of the West, this concealed subject pretends it has no geopolitical determinations. The much publicized critique of the sovereign subject actually inaugurates a subject. End quote. So I want to think about the ways in which the subject, kind of drawing from what others on the panel, what my brilliant colleagues have already outlined, how it is that the conservation of the West as subject ends up being reinforced through particular forms of embodiment, particularly racialized, gendered, and I want to sort of add to that, abject embodiment. And I think a lot of the technologies, for example, that all of us were talking about, the sort of systems of control, the systems for knowledge, the ways of knowing, how it is that we see, what my friend and colleague Mark Seeley of Autograph ABP in London calls the epidermal evidence of who we are, it ends up reinforcing this idea of the West as subject. So whereas Spivak argues, the history of Europe as subject is narrativized by law, certainly, by political economy, absolutely, and by ideology. I want to add another layer to that, which is it's narrativized through the body and embodiment. And when I want us to sort of think about embodiment, I also, not necessarily, it's not just about kind of the evidence of that which we see. You know, and I think it's important to sort of think about, right, so the three thinkers that we've been citing in terms of through the African American or the Afro-Caribbean, the African diaspora, if we looked at pictures, and I was debating putting them up, but I urge you to all Google images of Stuart Hall, of Paul Gilroy, and of W.E.B. Du Bois. Because that question of passing becomes really key. What it is that they look like, what the epidermal evidence of their racialization actually sort of manifests, because all of them are light-skinned black men. And it's a really interesting thing to think that these become the kind of prime theorists of how we understand blackness, and the prime sort of brilliant critical theorists. So that question of epidermal evidence, as with Angela being sort of mistaken for being Salvadoran, or Delane sort of painting whiteness on her skin and wiping it off, or Daniel sort of talking about passing, right, or me sort of moving through the world, and again sort of passing, not passing in various places, but usually passing until I open my mouth. Part of that question of embodiment, and I think mistaken identities, it destabilizes this idea also, and is a form of critique, and can be a possibility, a form of critique for the Spivak notion of the West as subject. And so how is that? I want to make an argument, and I think I'm drawing here from Hall, perhaps from Butler and to some extent, but that it's not just about the epidermal evidence that I'm talking about, but it's also about questions of bodily excess. And again, Angela said, I'm a fatty, right? And that's part of bodily excess. Like when one kind of doesn't conform to embodied gender ideals, which I certainly don't in so many ways. But it's also about voice, and I when we think about the West as subject, we think about law, how it is that we speak, how one speaks properly, as a non-Romani person, as a white person, as an educated person. There's a kind of articulation and a kind of engagement, an oral, A-U-R-A-L, right, and an oral, O-R-A-L, way of creating the kinds of embodiment that in the end, I want to say that as Butler and Carlos de Sena, who's written about gay Dominicans in New York City, will say there's a moment when one's feathers slip, when as much as one contains one's body in particular places, whatever that means, when one contains one's voice, when one contains one's excess, in the end something slips out and ends up betraying, which then really calls for, as Butler says, the constant management and kind of rearticulation of that which is inside, that which is outside, to be put back inside. So when we talk about the kind of subject for the West, right, what Spivak is talking about is actually continental philosophy, and leftist radical continental philosophy, a la Deleuze and Foucault. And her critique, right, or her argument with Deleuze and Foucault is that they, on the one hand, have names, and how many have read Can the Subaltern Speak? I don't necessarily have to go through this background a little bit. Should I go through the background a little bit? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you all know Michel Foucault? Right.
Sort of.
Right. Gilles Deleuze. You know who Deleuze and Guattari are. We know who all of the theorists that we've been citing are. And that is part of that narrativization that reinforces the subject of the West. And it's precisely, so Foucault, when she quotes him in Can the Subaltern Speak, Foucault is saying, well, I know a Maoist, who has a deep critique of all of these things, right? And so he sort of brings up the mythical Maoist that has no name, whereas Deleuze, on the other hand, ends up talking about, and it's this conversation amongst them, and it's in some ways she's setting up straw men in a lot of ways, but this critique, right? So Foucault has his Maoist, and Deleuze has his worker. And so she says, look, how is it that, she doesn't quite say this, but you, the two of you, and Sartre, and I would argue also, Stuart Hall and Judith Butler, and whom I adore, right? And Paul Gilroy and W.E.B. Du Bois. How is it that all of you have names, But then there's this kind of subject that becomes nameless and becomes simply a body moving through space. And in many ways, a kind of impossible body. And that's really what I would argue in this panel we're talking about. Where are the possibilities of impossible bodies, impossible subject positions? Where do they come in through the process of articulation? And what kinds of possibilities can one articulate through the impossible subject position? So for that, right, again, we have to move back, I think, I would argue, to the subject of the West and the idea and the notion of expertise. Because as you say, Angela, we're in the Hungarian Academy of Science. We're at the center of all expertise, right? And the critical, sort of the Roma critical theory working group that you've inaugurated in many ways opens up the question of what expertise means. Who are the subjects of expertise? And is it possible to be in spaces like that, because we are it's a bodies in space workshop? What are the possibilities for bodies to populate these spaces, and what are the possibilities for other forms of epistemology once we're in these spaces? And so at the beginning, when Gayatri Spivak points to the, quote, interested desire to conserve the subject of the West, or the West as subject, she talks about this impetus for much of the radical critique coming out of the West in the 1980s. And here we are at a moment in Romani studies when, in its current formation, there's actually a battle going on. And it's a battle to conserve the West as subject through expertise. Through the expertise of its most prominent scholars, often juxtaposed against the silence of, or the inexpert status of, the subjects of that expertise. Romani subjects, Romani communities, Romani knowledge and its production. So what happens when we have disruptive, excessive bodies, disruptive, excessive thoughts? In fact, disruptive and excessive citations, right? And that's key, because yesterday I talked about multiple kinds of citations in scholarly thought. And, when Daniel talks about the men that he interviewed, right, those kinds of engagements become something else. They're acceptable through forms of ethnography, right? Through kinds of through forms of artistic practice, right? Sort of Delane's refusal. But when we take them as theory, and when we take them as kind of embodied theory and embodied knowledge, what we end up doing is really creating an epistemological rupture. And I guess that's really part of my interest in this, is really thinking about what becomes possible through an embodied epistemological rupture. And it doesn't just mean presence. It actually means the kind of, the sort of living with and the working with the bodily excesses that we all inhabit in multiple ways. And we see that kind of inhabiting with the Roma body politics exhibitions, right? Both the attempt to control and the attempt to bound and to determine what it is that Romani people are, right? What does it mean to be a racialized body? But at the same time, the possibilities for disruption, even in the sort of juxtaposition of the two photographs, the kind of proper professional Gajikani photograph and the kind of other kind of Gajikani fantasy photograph. And so, how do we understand that? Deborah Thomas, in her work on the digital archive in the Caribbean, she's a Jamaican-American scholar, a feminist scholar, talks about the ways in which, for the Caribbean, the sort of colonial and post-colonial side of the Caribbean, the archive is always one of violence. So she talks about gang violence in Jamaica, she talks about kind of the violence of the IMF, right? And we're looking at that in Greece and in the European situation now, but the violence of debt, the violence of underdevelopment, that's kind of a deliberate thing, all of these kinds of violence. And she also looks at the violence that is the body, the archive of the body. And what she's talking about here are the sort of older violences that are gendered and racialized violence that have to do with the violence of slavery and the violence of bodily abuse, right? Of whipping, of rape, the taking of the body as something to be owned. And so in some ways, the taking of the body, the kind of occupation of the body, the ownership of the body of the other as something to be owned, becomes an archive of violence that is not really where she argues, right? You're never quite, despite emancipation, despite abolition, that's always the kind of haunting that we live in. And I think that haunting really is part, again, of how it is that we see the subject of the West as kind of constantly reinforced and constantly reintroduced. And we see it in, you know, the cranial and body measurements that Romani people were subject to, not just during the Nazi genocide, but, you know, leading up to it, before that, the whole sort of period of phrenology, of eugenics, and of all kinds of kind of measuring and looking and taking stock have happened, you know, within the genocide, but also preceding, and then also in the current moment, right? We have this still as a legacy that we live with. But we also have it with the extraction of labor. We have it with the possibility and the impossibility of Romani subjects walking into shops in central Budapest, you know, without being monitored as such, without being looked at to see if something's going to happen. We have it as in ways in which we also internalize the subject of the West in our own ability to enter into spaces like this, or our own sort of feelings when we do, right? I still get an immense anxiety coming in here every time. I'm 47. I should be beyond that, right? I can speak nicely. We can all speak very nicely. But my anxiety and my sort of my idea that somehow I'm going to be disruptive or be seen as something other than, you know, the proper kind of academic, the proper theorist, which, you know, all of these things are always in, but it comes in also in these crazy times when I'm talking to my children's teacher, that somehow someone's going to see my feathers slip or see my body excess. And I get I'm sort of terrified of these, you know, second and third grade teachers, like where then I have to say, well, you do know, but it's, so I think this part of it, the ways in which we then take on that violence, assume that violence, we constantly reproduce it. And so part of what I was thinking about, not just with measurements, with, you know, the measurement of your circumference, the measurement of our skin tone, which again is a way in which we constantly enact violence upon ourselves and upon one another. The measurement of, in some ways, the measurement of our ability to kind of engage in spaces that are outside of that which we understand as our sort of normal or natural spaces, are a way in which, right, and it's reinforced, as Spivak says, through law, right? It absolutely is, through political economy, through ideology, but it's also embodied constantly. And we not only have it enforced from outside, but we reinforce it ourselves. So I was thinking about what it would mean to engage with other kinds of archives, to take the archive back, to kind of push back on that and create our own archive. Understanding always, right, and Spivak and Derrida talk about the sort of haunting, right? Understanding always that we're always going to be haunted by that history, by the palimpsest of that which has gone before, which is a deeply violent and a deeply racialized history. But what would another archive look like? And I want to give two proposals. How's my time?
That's fine.
It's okay. So I just want to give two proposals. And one is, it has to do with the writing that I've been doing on encampment and taking back the camp. Where, you know, I argue that, and I'm going to sort of I'm going to work through this a little bit on a paper I've written, and then my second proposal will be about intimacy. But the first one is the camp, the mahala, the neighborhood. These are living creations, and they're both, yes, they're products of racism, but they're also products of and producers of the everyday lives of Roma. So as I've been writing in defense of the camp, in order to reclaim it, and here I mean the sort of all sorts of camps. I mean the camp of the lager, but I mean the camp of the mahala, but I also mean the camp that, you know, of the trailer, of the tent, of the refugee site. I want to think about how it is that we acknowledge our history as victims of the Holocaust, of roundups, of enslavement, of marginalization and forced settlement, but also to acknowledge the ways in which the camp, the Romani encampment, in the form of the caravan, the mahala, the home, has enabled us to survive for a millennium in often hostile environments, despite the genocide, and in fact in the midst of genocide and violence. So most recently, in face of increased violence, expulsions, deportations, and evictions, in face of the often state-sponsored appropriation of that which is ours, we've populated more and more refugee camps, more IDP camps, and more makeshift living formations than ever in our history. So what is this? All of these, the refugee camp, the encampment, the mahala, the caravan, the post-socialist and socialist apartment block, the individual home, they end up being part of us. They end up being the space through which our bodies move. And in many ways, we embody all of these living formations, and we inhabit them as surely as they inhabit us. So in one of the things that I think we've done, and people can get maybe upset about this and angry about this because I do think I'm making a contention that might be somewhat either problematic or at least subject to debate. One of the things that we do as we move into spaces like this is that we deny the camp. And we want to deny the camp in terms of denying our status as victims in some ways because we want to take charge. But we end up denying those histories of violence in order to produce ourselves as proper bourgeois subjects. And I think I'm at a point in life when I'm tired of producing myself as a proper bourgeois subject. I'm tired of producing myself as a Gajikani Romani. I'm tired of producing myself as a proper academic. And so what does it mean to claim the history, right? I mean, and that history that's both been denied us, that's been forced upon us, but also that we end up taking and inhabiting and making our own, that we end up embodying. How do we create that history into another archive? So as I said, one is refusal, right? We are I'll sort of say, we are Europeans. We've been enslaved, transported, evicted, and expelled. We are trafficked, we are forcibly sterilized, and we are murdered. We claim our humanity, and we claim our humanity, we claim our history, we claim our place on the soil of Europe, on the soil of America, on the soil of Africa, on the soil of Asia, on the soil of Australia and Antarctica, right? And we've been here for centuries. We number 10 to 12 million. We outnumber many of the recognized European nations that we can talk about, including Swedes, Serbians, Irish, and Austrians. And you, not you, but Gaje, the Swedes, the Serbians, the Irish, the Austrians, and others, have benefited from our expertise, from our horse breeding, from our woodworking, from our ability to recycle, from to make music, to make art, and to make theory, even though you're not recognizing it. You've benefited from our labor as slaves, as deportees, as those who pick your fruits and vegetables, those who clean up your rubbish, as those who pave your roads and fix that which you have broken and discarded. You benefit from our expertise as your everyday psychologists in the form of fortune-telling, as the predictors of the future in terms of speculation that has nothing to do with HBSC or other banks. But even as you deny our position in the world, as you work to include us through the decade of Roma inclusion and beyond, what you refuse to see is that the problem has never been with our inclusion. That's too mild, it's too inoffensive a word to describe the offenses that have been carried out against us. But rather with the racism, segregation, and violence, the genocide and mass murder, the exploitative and extractive practices to which we have been constantly subject. You have benefited from these exclusions, from such practices, from the violence, even as you personally may not have carried it out. and from the exoticization of our culture, of our subject positions, in order to secure your employment, your riches, your sense of superiority, and your sense of your own cultural richness. So my first step in terms of reclaiming the archive of our bodies is to refuse, to point it out and to refuse it. My second step, my second proposition, is to think about where our other archives are. And that goes back to the question of the camp or the encampment and the mahala. To think about the intimate archives that we hold inside through our language, through our love for each other and our sense of community, which is as deep as it is broad. Through our families, through the idea of a mother tongue, be it in Romanes, be it in Pogari, be it in a non-Romani language, but in the idea of a tongue that we take on in Kalo, where we take the world, we take our sense of the world, and we shift it around and make it our own. So that question of recycling and that question of embodiment, the question of intimacy and beauty, the performance that happens that's not for Gaje but is actually for ourselves, is something that I would argue would help us to take back our archive. So in some ways it's a double movement, and I feel like I've gone on way too long and I'm going to shut up, but we have to do the refusal, the pointing out of what's ours, the reclaiming. And then in order to do that, we have to also claim the intimacy that is ours, the intimate forms of embodiment, being at, our mother's breasts or not at our mother's breasts, being the kinds of ways in which masculinity and femininity, the ways in which straightness and queerness end up being part of the community of which we're a part. So that it doesn't end up being a kind of, and in the US we've been sort of obsessed with the Rachel Dolezal thing, this white woman who passes as black. So it doesn't end up being just a kind of aping of what the non-Roma expect from us, a kind of re-exoticization of ourselves, but actually a claiming of the intimacy and a maintenance of the intimacy that I think many of us do in our everyday lives, but I actually want to take it to the level of theory and think about how it is that we disrupt space through the intimacy of the Romani body and the Romani subject, and through to end on something that we can talk about over the next 2 weeks, through a politics of love. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think it is a really, really rich panel. And now I would like to invite you and open up for discussion. Petra?
So much to say, I don't know. So, thank you. In no particular order, one thing that struck me just towards the end of your talk, Ethel, is, part of the issue, just from a psychological perspective, we tend to protect members of the majority. That's what we do. We do it all the time in our interactions. We are protecting them from the discomfort, and we're protecting ourselves from the engagement with that discomfort. So that's just one side comment. In general, I'm hearing, all these different things about the gaze and embodiment of difference. But they're actually very disparate things in many ways. We're looking at the visible, something that's visible and something you cannot choose, and things that are visible that you can choose, like your clothing and my gold, something that I've been struggling with a lot this year. This is my family gold. And when I wear it in academia or in music therapy, excuse my language, it is a fuck you to people's expectations of what a professional looks like. And I was told when I was starting my internship, you must not wear any ostentatious jewelry because you want to look neutral. So by neutral, they mean white and middle class. So this is something I've been struggling with. We have embodied difference that's not visible when you have a Romani child or a half Romani or a quarter Romani child in an orphanage and they're trying to place it. It doesn't matter what the kid looks like. Right. They're looking inside at the kid's so-called genes, and there are these ethno-theories of genetics that are really at play here. They were at play with the Nazis, and sometimes it's about what you look like and sometimes it isn't. Same thing with being gay or lesbian. We can go into transgender issues too, all of this stuff about visible, invisible, outside, inside. But I would also like to cite my mother and my son, both of whom, unlike me, are visibly Romani, epidermis-wise. And because I kind of felt like it was the elephant in the room here, like when my son says, but I'm black and you're not. He's right. Like ultimately, identity, passing, whatever, gold or not gold, he is ultimately black and I'm not. And I just want to name that, and for everybody here of all different shades, just to put that out there. And then the final thing I want to say, you know, I've seen those photos before. You know, and it's interesting. I do have to, you know, you said there's the professional photos and then the ones I think you called it a Gajapani fantasy. And I would like to challenge you on that, because I think part of them are fantasy, but part of them are very real. This is what Roma actually dress like. And so here's where I'd like to cite my mother, who's always taught me, you are what you dress like, and who has spent her life, and I think everybody in this room understands this, dressing so that she would make it less likely for her to be recognized as Romani. And so my question is, you know, her pride was when she was, I don't know, some like late teenager or something, I was in a tram and I heard them whisper, well, she must be a foreigner. She was in Czechoslovakia and she was so proud. So my question is, what is our agenda in terms of these performances, outward performances of identity that we can choose, and for whom? Because it's one thing for me, or you know, me who looks white, or for somebody who doesn't look white, to go into academia and flash our gold and flash our language, however we want to do that. And it's another thing for people in other positions, right? And so one of the things that I honestly, and you might think this is like completely crazy and the opposite of what we're trying to do, but one of the things I think would just be helpful on an everyday practical, go out and get a job at your local grocery store level, is to go and like remind, like not like have my mother go and remind Roma in our neighborhood in Prague that if you dress this way, you are more likely to get a job. And if you dress that way, you're less likely to get a job, period. Right? And we wince, but that's because we're sitting here. And we're not trying to get that job at the grocery store. Right? So that's just
Thanks. There was someone there, and after Valerie and Anna.
Thank you for bringing the topic that right of my questions to my comments and everything. Because it's actually connected to one. You know, I want to go beyond what Lex comment, which is like that actually bodies are knowledge production. I'm not focused on like whether racialized bodies have any impact on the self-perception. Like it's exactly what Petra was saying here right now. Like how much being aware that our bodies are rational have impact on how we perceive ourselves and how we're going to represent ourselves outside. You know? Does it have any influence on our own identity as Roma people, especially as Roma women? And like, do we have to change it in order to get what we want?
First, my comment, my question to Angela about the identities, about the majority imposed identities. Why do you think that many Roma activists face the issue when they are not recognized as Roma by clerks, by someone who is in position, like, oh, you're too educated, or you are not too dark, or you behave differently. A lot of Roma activists face this, oh, you are not Roma. That's what they say when we start to interact with them. I mean, I want to hear the, let's say, scientific explanation to this.
Scientific, baby!
No, right, explain this. Why
the definitive.
That we are not Roma. And the second relates to Edsel's phrase white blackness. You know, among the first 10 presidents of Liberia, this West African, Afro-American nation, Creole nation, there were 10 presidents, and 5 of them actually passed as whites. If you would see their pictures, even if you would know, yes, they have drop of African blood, you would see that they are just like whites, maybe black-haired but white people. So, and the question is that about probably this is imposed identity. They were just told that they are black, but in reality they were not. But sometimes this imposed identity and this cliché, they create a big problem for people. You know, I would like to hear more extended comment on white blackness, of trying to pass as someone else. And also this was an issue with this Jobbik's activist who found out that he is Jewish.
Yes.
So, I mean, a little bit more comments, please.
Yeah. Anna and someone.
Okay, hi. So I wanted to bring it down also a little bit to the experience of actually scholarly knowledge production and our status as scholars and Roma people and Roma activists also many times. Because also Patricia Hill Collins was writing about this outsiders within status.
Yeah.
So this refers also about this question of authenticity, that we have to, as scholars, we have to kind of be between the worlds, right? We have to demonstrate our authenticity as scholars of our rational minds in the world of the academia, but then we also have to kind of confirm our authenticity among the Roma people that we're actually researching. And many times we research, we go into field work across groups, genders, languages and countries. So there's always this struggle of actually negotiating your identity to be seen as authentic Roma and an authentic voice. And then on the other hand, we have all of these debates coming on right now about this status of what does it mean to be a Romani researcher, and this whole debate that Matros also brings out about this self-ascribed Roma, self-identified Roma, as if there is a choice of choosing maybe being or not being Roma, and that this somehow affects our objectivity and our rationality of our mind, right? So this whole outsiders within status, I mean, it's something very real that doesn't happen only with Roma, but also with many other subaltern voices and subaltern groups, and it brings violence, it brings anxiety, it brings a lot of problems to the very body of the researcher. So I'm wondering whether there are ways of actually overcoming this through very specific ways, I don't know, mentoring, tutoring, maybe decolonizing knowledge on one side. And then on the other hand, also I've been reading a lot about the indigenous knowledge. Not indigenous researchers, but the indigenous knowledge, the recognition of a specific, very intimate types of knowing, learning, passing on knowledge, and understanding of the world through the experience of a minority. So I'm wondering whether something or exploring something like the Romani knowledge can actually be, as some other minority scholars also argue, an act of self-determination, of searching for an emancipation and decolonizing of the way we are perceived. And the final comment also, I'm wondering about this pluralities of experiences of actually being Roma. I mean, I think that it's really important. Okay, we can act Roma, right? The rings and the big blacks, the big sort of colorful skirts. On the other hand, this is an experience of, I mean, of everyday, many everyday Roma lives, but not necessarily. I mean, we have the queer LGBTs, we have the hipster Roma of the modern times, and we have all of those different expressions of
Judeo-Roma.
So I wonder whether it really is beneficial of, in parallel of acting white or acting black, acting Roma, or whether we actually should challenge all of those notions and just say that there is no such thing as acting Roma. There is such a huge range of being Roma and pluralities of experiences and identities that maybe we should actually go in that direction and in this way decolonize the image that was imposed on us.
Very good. Can
Yeah.
you tell us your name, because I
Yes, sorry, my name is Elmira.
Emira.
Yes. First of all, I wanted to thank you for mentioning Nella Larsen's passing. It's absolutely an amazing book, and I think a lot of Roma people can actually identify with it. So I highly recommend it. And also another thing that I wanted to raise is the issue of whiteness for the Roma and how Roma perceive each other in terms of whiteness, and how important it is to define beauty, because it happens all the time that white Roma are more beautiful than the dark Roma. And consider, exactly. Or having blue eyes or green eyes. And I think this, I don't think if this issue has been researched before, but I think it's absolutely
interesting, and also how women and men perceive it at the same time. So if you can suggest any readings, I would be absolutely interested to.
Yeah.
I wrote about it briefly.
Yeah.
I did, but also it is such a worldwide thing in Latino cultures, in South Asia. It's like, name one culture that has a gradation of color that doesn't actually value. I mean, other than white people who want to be tan right now in this particular historical time.
That's a huge,
But
yeah.
name a culture with gradations of color that doesn't
Rachel
consider lightness more beautiful. And you go to Jackson Heights and you see Bangladeshi and Hindi TV, and like, you wouldn't think that these people are from South Asia. Because, like, where do they even get them? They must import them, because it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and there has been stuff written on that. I mean, off the top of my head, but there are. I mean, we can talk.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and also to just add on that, if you watch the movies, like Bollywood movies, the villain is always darker than the
Than the hero, exactly.
always. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I want to ask, there's many musicians and even Angela says she's a good dancer. Why are we not talking about dance when we're talking about the body?
Yeah.
I think that's very important. There's really interesting theoreticians in the Caribbean, now that we're thinking about the Caribbean. Angel Quintero, I think, is my hero, and my personal hero, and his body is Body and Culture book. But we will do that. I don't think it's translated, but
No.
I think it's wonderful because it talks about the body as a site of indigenous knowledge, like what Anna was saying, through dance, through the way we move. And I think that's very powerful, and I think, that was pretty much mine. And also, like this idea of blackness, I think that's really relative. People black in some places are not black in other places, so we need to relativize that as well. Like, there's a lot of experience of transatlantic travels of Roma who then start to feel beautiful in the United States or somewhere else because their skin is perceived as different.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to start talking about personal experiences and what's going on in different countries and what is perceived as black or white.
Yeah. Shall we start?
Yeah.
Maybe just reflecting on. I think. Okay, so I'm not sure that I will be able to answer to everything, but I would like to point out a few commonalities which has been raised by you. I think one of the important things that the power, and we didn't talk about it. And power, I think it's very important when we're talking about passing, when we're talking about light skin, right? When we are talking about the way as the people are coding you as Roma or non-Roma, and or the performative act as well. Who can act? Can we act as a Roma? Is there a freedom to do that? Or it's very much determined by the very specific social, political context and location. And I think it's really important to analyze the power, so the power position and the access to various sources. And I was really struck by the fact when Ethel, you told that, and you're absolutely right, if we're going to look at Paul Gilroy, Du Bois, and all these guys, Stuart Hall. So they were like a light-skinned black people. So they had the power to change their positions. They had the power to passing. They had the power to speak to the black people, but speak to the white academia as well, right? To speak the same language, to find the tone of that, and to express themselves in such a coded language, which is very much used by the academia. And I think that's a fucking power, right? So that's really a power. If someone can do that, so that means that you have a power to do that. And I think that's a really important point when we are talking about performance or acting Roma, or can we do that, or can you be seen someone else, or when you are traveling to US, or when you are traveling to the Middle East, how the people look at you, right? So just like one of my personal experience, and I never ever felt that I'm white, but actually since I moved to the US, I had a moment in my life when I felt that I'm white. My whiteness, my privilege, in that specific context. So my son is attending a public school, North Carolina, quite segregated system, like 98% of the kids in that particular magnet schools are blacks or Latino. And my son was considered to be the only white guy, in his classroom. He took it very well, the whole challenge, and he has actually one of the black guys, his friend, and we wanted to meet with them and to take the guy to the museums and theater. And when I met with his mother, who is like really a single mother, single black mother who has 3 or 4 jobs in order to sustain the families, I was considered to be a white professor who is teaching at Wake Forest University. And that was a very interesting moment in my life, because I never ever felt this here. Never ever. So even though that I have PhD, I could use doctor, but I never really use. Or, I'm still research fellow in the Hungarian Academy of Science, but I never ever felt that I'm white, even in this specific context as well, right? And if I compare myself with my father, who is completely black, and I'm a lighter skin, so I can pass and I can have this power, right? So I can talk to the people who are sitting in academia, but he cannot. So I think he's very much, determined, and I think that would be a really interesting step to problematize the power, the connections, the nexus between power and performance, or acting Romaness, or be Roma. One of the issues which is mentioned by Valerie, right? This that is it. What was that, like the problem when we are seen as a not Roma, or not identified as Roma? Because basically what they would like to see, that to fulfill their expectations, right? So it's again protecting them, to fulfilling their desire, fulfilling their little imaginations, the way as they think about Roma, the way as you have to act. And if you are not fulfilling that, then you are out of this sphere, right? So you're going to be...
their own whiteness. Whiteness is such a
commodity.
commodity.
Yeah, it's a commodity.
Yeah.
Yes. And...
Angela, could you maybe mention, I think your question also referred what about us ourselves being Roma, not being recognized not by the whites, but by the Roma.
Yes.
I mean, how do you perform
I think it's a kind of really schizophrenic situation, to tell you the truth. No, but really, you have to work on that. So, and I think we are still, many of us, working on that. So I think it's, it's not something what we should, I think, hide, because that's the truth. So how you can be like an authentic Roma in the small village close to the Ukrainian borderline, that happened to be my little village where I was born, and I'm gonna go back within this month. And how can I be, the same person whom they know, and without pretending that I belong to the bourgeois class or belonging to the Hungarian academia. So I think it's very much depends from you. I mean, it's kind of personal thing, I think, and very much depends from you that how you can you know, accommodate yourself in that specific context, and I think authenticity or authentic power, which is really coming from you, it's coming from your lived experience, and I think that's what you can use, and that's what you can use as a tool, but also it's a question of that how you can be recognized in the academic context, right? So even though that you have a PhD, even though that you worked hard, even though that you are, you know, building your life from the scratch, I mean, comparing with some other guys who are coming from middle class or upper middle class, you really coming from nowhere, and you have to build up yourself, and I think on one hand you carries with your inferiority complex. That's why we have to work on ourselves. Like, I'm talking about myself as well, so I'm always feel inferior. Of course, it's a continuous struggle, and it's a continuous you know, yeah, work on that and face with that and challenge yourself as much as you can, and I think it's very much depends from the context that how do they react on you, and that's connected with many of your points, right? So the how does it impact our self-esteem, the way as we are perceived, right? So it has a power, and Du Bois is talking about the double consciousness. So it's always like these double eyes. On one hand, the way as you see yourself, the way as you perceive yourself, right? And you want to build up your own identity, but another way, the people, how do they look at you? And that's very much shaping your self-esteem as well. And I think that's very much like these psychological issues, again, what you have to encounter. And if you are alone and you don't know people and you don't know anyone who would be in the same situation, then it's going to be really hard journey, because basically you have to fight alone. But if you are able to share this really hard journey, these kinds of struggle, I think that can be a really source of empowerment and source of sharing and enacting your identity in a collective manner. And I shut up here.
I'll try and sort of give an overview answer to what was been said in general. I mean, the question of authenticity, the question of whiteness and blackness. I mean, for myself personally, it's almost every situation I'm in, I have to deal with this. I mean, when I did the exhibition here at Gallery 8, I did a talk to start off with about what the work was, explaining the pieces, etc. And then someone came up to me and said, "Why are you making the association with Roma?" So I turned around and said, "It's not an association, I was born Roma." And I still had the same question again afterwards, and this is a constant ongoing, you know. And my son, who is about 6'4", blonde with blue eyes, he's a writer, he's editor of Travellers Times in the UK. He's very often in a situation, because he's worked for the BBC as well, so he's very often in a situation where there are protests about Roma and Gypsy encampments. So the first thing he does is he talks to the people who are protesting against it. And he talks to them, and because of what he looks like, it all comes out. All their racism, everything else comes out. Then he walks over to the encampment, spends a bit of time there, has a cup of tea talking to everyone, and then he comes back and they say, and then these people will say to him, "But you were over there talking to them." And he says, "Because I am one of them." So I think the protection of the majority with whiteness in our community is seen as such a threat to a degree as well. And I think, I agree, I don't think we really talk about this issue as well, that it is threatening, because people's expectation of their stereotype of who we are is so ingrained that they cannot believe that you've got an education or you've got a degree or you've got a PhD or you're working in law or you're maybe a doctor or a nurse or whatever it is, any position that is seen other than what their expectation is, which is very low, completely low, lower than probably any other community that exists, is completely and utterly undermined and threatened.
Mm.
And so I think we need to sort of almost see that as I mean, to a degree, we have a lot of power, but I don't think we're sort of using it in many ways.
Yep.
And I think this is what we have to start to do, and we have to start to recognise we're an international community, we have this massive diversity, and that is a real powerful tool. And I just think we need to work together to actually really utilise that, because I feel that's the way forward. So instead of taking on board or we've got to try and reflect what's been imposed upon us for so long, that I think we have to be careful, because I think there's many arguments within the community about authenticity, and we've got to stop doing that. It's the old divide and conquer, the old colonialist trick. We've got to get over that. And once we get over that, actually, you know, what the fear is that actually many people know this. You know, and Ethel said, you know, we've got populations that are more than some European states. My God, that's a threat. Because if you mobilise even a fraction of those people to not take that rubbish that they're being dished all for centuries, then that's problematic. So I think we have to recognise that, you know, and we've only got to manoeuvre a certain percentage of us in order to be able to make that shift. And I think the problem is at the moment there's many people in positions of power over us, in academia, for example. They know this.
I think part of the threat is, and you know, I think we're scared to say the word class. And then, you know, we're talking about ethnicity in our, you know, our families back in the village, so to speak, or literally. But this is the Romani middle class, both a reality and a dream and a threat. And I think every one of us has to kind of decide for ourselves, what is our relationship to class? And are you going to struggle with that? Are you going to apologize for that? Or are you going to own that? My personal choice has been, I very much own my middle classness. And I personally think that there's a certain work, if more Roma own that middle classness and more non-Roma see that, again, it's a threat, and there's going to be backlash, and we see the backlash every day. What you're talking about, you cannot possibly be Romani. I need you, I desperately need you to not be a gypsy if you are middle class, right? But what are we going to do about that? Can we name kind of our, you know, our space in these hierarchies? And of course, I think at the same time we have to problematize those hierarchies. We have to problematize class. But so it's not really, it's not a manifesto. It's a question. But you know, the idea of the Romani middle class is so little talked about, and I think that's the real problem.
Yeah.
Well, and can I? Do you want to? You want me to?
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
I'll just. The research that I was discussing towards the end brought up wider questions of Roma visibility, and just in relation to Menta, Petra, and Anna's questions, I think they are this idea of the signs that we send out through the jewellery that we wear, and perhaps the behaviours that we embody. I think they're a question of aesthetics, and I think Roma are peculiarly well placed to capitalise on that, really, because we have such a rich visual culture. We have such a long history of acculturation through non-literary means. So our culture is really worn on our bodies and in our homes. So I think the possibilities for emancipation possibly lie in our abilities to take hold of that power and put across the stories that we want to put across, and put across the powers that we feel are necessary through the way that we embody our culture and through the objects or behaviours that we decide to exhibit. So I think that's a very broad question, and I think we have the power to enhance it, but we can talk about that a bit later in my discussions this afternoon.
On a theoretical plane, I think Bourdieu is really our friend there.
Yeah.
To question taste, because of course our aesthetic is considered tacky and kitsch and tasteless. So, but we have allies, in high places in order to subvert that.
But also tackiness is very strong, because tackiness refers to the idea of being sticky.
Yes.
So if something's tacky, you're drawn to it.
Yep.
And then we've got their attention. So then we can play within that. So I think you're right, Bourdieu and cultural capital is a very interesting area for us.
Yes, and actually I want to say something about that just a second. Viscosity. Who's the guy who wrote A Psychedelic White? Yes. Can I just say, as the sort of tackiness, it's interesting. Just Arun Saldana has written this book about Goa and trans culture. And the idea of the viscosity of whiteness and how whiteness becomes sticky. So as we kind of take off our jewelry, and I'm thinking about what Delane said about whiteness, right? But I think it's the other way around as well, right? So no matter how dark one is, or whatever it is, or authentically Romani looking, whatever that means, the minute one becomes a member of the middle class, or if one is sort of generations of middle class, or you're an academic, or you're an intellectual, the authenticity is still called into question because you're still seen as white. And so it's a really interesting thing, right? Because then the race and the class and the ways in which the two affect to one another, and this viscosity of whiteness does mean that our own tackiness, that does become a tactic, that our tackiness can be a response, which, so that question, Petra, that you said about how you wish your mom could just go in and tell people, dude, put on a suit, you'll get, or put on this and you'll get a job, take off your whatever, scrub your skin. I'm thinking about the South Asian community, drink lots of turmeric. Is that the word in English? Turmeric? Yes.
And they're going to be white.
And it makes you whiter. Yeah, so just drink some turmeric every day, you'll be whiter. There are all sorts of things, right? I'm married to a Pakistani Bangladeshi. I know all the tricks for becoming whiter. But I think I want to remind us, right? And what Delane was saying about our Audre Lorde project in Dubrovnik, to say, quote, Audre Lorde, queer, black, feminist, right, Brooklynite, says, quote, "For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. Racism and homophobia are real conditions in all of our lives in this place and time. I urge each one of us here to reach down into that deep place of knowledge inside herself and touch that terror and loathing of any difference that lies there. See whose face it wears. Then the personal as the political can begin to illuminate all of our choices." End quote. And so for me that means, and I'm thinking about the question of authenticity, and I want to throw it out the window. Some of you know the story of maybe when I was 18 and I, went to, my family didn't go to secondary school. I grew up in a trailer with no one sort of as models for secondary school, much less university. So I got to university and I found the corner of the library that had the Romani studies books. So the Yaran Matrases of the world and, all of the Gypsy Loris, and I started to read it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm doing it all wrong. I'm not a real, oh no, I have to do it properly. And so I put on my long skirt and I went home and I started to tell my family how to be a really Romani. And of course that question, this is not, you guys, we aren't authentic. We haven't been authentic in centuries. This is what you have to do to be authentic. And my mother was like, okay, yeah, go outside, change. I don't know what you're doing, but you're going to embarrass yourself, embarrass me.
Sort yourself out.
You got hundreds of people around you and you look like a Dilino. Right, a Dilini. But you look like a Dinlo, you look like a Dilini, so just go and deal with yourself, right? So it was just this moment, and I think for me that moment sticks with me because we don't need authenticity. What we need, and John Jackson talks about this when he sort of goes into Harlem as an African-American anthropologist, and he creates a superhero version of himself, so he's got a cartoon thing, but he talks about the necessity for sincerity, for racial sincerity, as opposed to for racial authenticity. And that beautiful diversity that we've talked about, the kind of plurality of our culture, becomes the source of strength and of pride. I wanted to say a couple of other things, and then I will also shut up. The question, well, no, that's fine. We can leave all of that. I want to say later on, Jane and Delane and Daniel and I will also talk to you about the project that we just finished in London, which was also about the disruption of sincerity, where we put on a performance that was a tour of the Romani Triangle of Shoreditch. And what we ended up doing was created a Romani Triangle and created a Romani history. So Delane was the Romani Embassy. Daniel didn't call yourself the Romani Post Office, but
that's a good term.
But in my fantasy, he was the Romani. I mean, he was handing. He was the Romani Post Office. Jane was the crazy Gaji who fantasizes about being gypsy, and Damien was the sort of encased artist in the box. So we had horses running through the streets of Shoreditch, stopping corporate traffic. So we did this whole project that ended up being a combination of kind of fantasy and Romani history of London. And I think it's really important to think about how we work with troubling expectations, working with the fantasies that we know are actually, and I know we talked about not using gaje in English, and I think you're probably right about that, Yard, but I'm going to keep doing it. But to say that it troubles the sort of Gajikane fantasy, and by the way, and you're totally right about those are not just Gajikane fantasies; they're also all of our fantasies, right? Because we
internalize.
We do. Yeah. So I'll shut up.
Can I make a confession? I just left my flowery scarf in the apartment for many days because I thought if I will put it on, all those academic Roma, they will think, oh, look at the gaje with the flowers. And she pretends to be a dancer as well, oh my god.
Now let me explain to you. If you buy the flowery scarf from us, then it's okay.
If you made the business with us, that's okay. We're just kidding. Actually, I think we have to leave, right? Because, but I think we symbolically,
we continue.
Came here, invaded this place, and we took over. No, but really, I think that was a very important act. So thank you so much that you were here, and in this afternoon we're gonna have Daniel, and we're gonna continue. Right?
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks. Thanks.